Most of them feel that they have to look hesitant, that if they leapt right in and said, this is great, it's terrific, they undermine themselves, so they have to look like they've given it grave thought and lengthy consideration, and many of them will come around and be for it.
Right. On the Republican side, we have recalcitrant Republicans, right? Almost everybody has come out on the Republican side and denounced the deal. Some have made slightly fools of themselves by denouncing the deal before they had even read it or even knew what was in it. You say that by being that recalcitrant, they're undermining their position. Do you mean politically or do you mean substantively?
Well, both. It's the same thing. They look as if they don't know what's in it. They haven't bothered to read it. They're just automatically against it. There is a group, the person who watches Bob Corker of Tennessee, who's the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. He hasn't denounced it. He's raised grave questions about it. Right. And if he comes out in some way for it or with a resolution that modifies it in some way with some accompanying thing, he can probably bring about 5 or so Republican senators.
The key Democratic character in the hesitant Democratic category is Chuck Schumer. Someone who is, to this day, I saw him interviewed on television recently saying, he has not read the deal yet, and so he's not going to say anything. Obviously, he's a very strong supporter of Israel, a very strong New York senator, has very strong allegiances in that area. Tell me about the calculations you think that are going on inside that rather calculating head.
The main thing is, it's not just that he's pro-Israel. A lot of people are pro-Israel who like the deal and think it's good for Israel. He's a pro-Israeli government.
Right.
That's the difference between AIPAC and J Street, for example.
He's pro-Likud is what you're saying.
Right.
Right.
And there are many who say you can be very loyal to Israel without supporting whatever the government of the day is saying, and they think it's a good deal.
Just give us a sense, handicapping things now. Obviously, this is going to stretch out over the course of the next 60 days or so, at least. Give us a sense for your handicapping of how likely President Obama is to have the numbers he needs.
Well, the vote counters I've talked to, a couple of them, they say we don't have, in the Senate you'd have to have 34 votes to block an override of a veto. What he would veto is not that it went down, but they'd pass a resolution of disapproval.
Right.
And that's what the president would veto.
Right.
They say we're not there yet, but we're going to get there.
Right. What is your sense of how the president thinks about this deal?
Well, one of the criticisms that's not to be made about Barack Obama is that he's dumb.
Right.
He's a very smart man. And as he said, look, he's a young man. He's going to be around in 10 years when this deal runs out, or 15 years.
Right.
He doesn't want to walk around as the guy who handed Iran the bomb. And people say, well, this will lead to Iran having the bomb. Not having this deal means they get a bomb sooner. I mean, there's a simple logical flaw in the opposition.
I want to switch and talk to you a little bit about this book of yours, the paperback version of a famous book you wrote called Washington Journal, which was called Washington Journal Reporting Watergate and Richard Nixon's Downfall. In the book, which is, of course, a famous book in the pantheon of Washington political journalism, you have a new afterword that you've written, basically about what's changed and what's stayed the same in the course of those 40 years since Richard Nixon left office. So my question to you, Elizabeth Drew, what has changed and what has stayed the same?
Oh, a lot has changed. My afterword is really about how Nixon got from being in ruins, having been thrown out of office, the only president ever was, in San Clemente, isolated, and he brought himself back up to be accepted by the establishment. 5 presidents were at his funeral. He'd have just thought that was the greatest victory of all. What's changed is we're more alert.
Yeah.
And I think people say, can there be another Watergate? No, there can't, because that came out of Richard Nixon's head and his psyche and his traits in him from childhood. So, but I think we're more alert. We have more mechanisms for stopping transgressions. I don't think you're going to see enemies lists, and you're not going to see, well, you're not going to see the kinds of things that went on there, and we're going to be able to stop it sooner.
One of the things that's striking looking at the blurbs for the book is that you have a couple, there are many people praise the book and say how great it was when it first came out. In the hardback version and now in the paperback, people revising their praise for it. The two that really struck me was one of Tony Lewis, who talks about that time. He says it was a time when the Constitution came alive, and our own Albert Reinhold Hunt Jr., who says it's a reminder that American politicians can rise and respond to crises. Those are both sort of heartening reflections on that time. For a lot of people, Watergate is remembered as a great mess. In some ways, do you think it's also sort of a great triumph in some way for the system?
Well, Tony Lewis was right in the sense that it was a constitutional struggle. This wasn't cops and robbers and bad guys versus good guys. Was the president going to be held accountable to any branch of the government? He was defying the courts, the Congress, and the public, obviously. it wasn't foregone that he would be impeached. Actually, technically, he was run out of office, but he would have been impeached in the House and probably convicted in the Senate because enough evidence came out at the last minute. The upside of that was, here was the House Judiciary Committee, not famous people,
right.
A lot of them quite ordinary, right. And they rose to it. And to us, they were James Madison. You know, they were very serious about it, very thoughtful. And against the odds, they came up with 3 articles of impeachment that were accepted widely by the country because they did it from the center and they did it in a bipartisan way. Try that again.